Hey everyone, and welcome to Hans Wargaming. In this video, we're going to be making 3 different types of wooden bridges. These projects are really quick and easy to make. The main materials are going to be stir sticks and popsicle sticks, but feel free to substitute them with other materials if you want. We'll start with the easiest project, the Makeshift Bridge. These bridges were cobbled together with whatever materials were lying around. They aren't supposed to look designed. As long as it gets you from point A to point B, there's really no wrong way to make one. I started with some popsicle sticks, cutting off the rounded ends and breaking some of them in half to make them look more rustic. I started with 2 or 3 main boards and just piled more boards randomly on top of those. These bridge projects are going to be at least 40 millimeters wide. The nice thing about these makeshift bridges is you can line them up side by side to make even wider bridges, since they don't really have defined edges. I threw a few pieces of corrugated paper in there as well to add some variety, but again, you can get pretty creative with these and add pretty much any material. For longer makeshift bridges, I used old chopsticks. I cut off the curry-stained ends just because I can feel you judging me. Again, just randomly gluing planks and corrugated paper on top of that. I wasn't really being careful with how I applied the wood glue on these and decided to try dunking them in sand to soak up the excess glue. These sandy spots are going to end up being either caked in mud or corrosion. I used the pliers to break off some of the ends and a wood chisel and razor blade to carve some texture into the wood, just to make them look a little more weathered. After that, I made a dark brown wash with water, wood glue, and paint, and I soaked each bridge in that mixture. I gave that about a day to dry, then I base coated the corrugated cardboard with black. I also used black paint and water to build up a bit of contrast between some of the planks, and once that was fully dry, I dry brushed some khaki paint over the bridges. I used Army Painter's plate metal on the corrugated metal sheets. Then it was another round of dry brushing with the khaki paint. This time I dabbed it on down the center of the bridge and then blended that in with circular brush strokes. To add some greenery to these planks, I used zombie, orc flesh, and acid green dip. Blending those together created a pretty convincing mold / algae / moss effect on the wood. For these bridges, I wanted to try building up some mossy areas, so I applied some Mod Podge and fine flock around the edges in a few spots. And finally, I used some rust pigments and matte Mod Podge to add some rust effects on the corrugated sheets. If you're new to using pigments, this is a pretty great starter set. By the way, I'll have a link to all the products used here in the description. I also have an Amazon affiliate page that has a full list of the products that I use, and I update that regularly if you want to check that out. It's a good way to help support this channel at no extra cost to you. And that's how I made these makeshift bridges. On to the next project, the basic trail bridge. Again, we're using stir sticks and popsicle sticks here. I have a hobby saw and miter box that I use for stuff like this if I want to get a clean cut. I don't really have the patience to cut a whole bunch of these one at a time, so I tried cutting them all at once and quickly reached the limits of my hobby saw's abilities. Fortunately, I have a proper miter saw that made quick work of these off camera. I used the popsicle sticks to build the floor frame. So I cut these popsicle sticks to about 3.5 inches, and the frame is 2 popsicle sticks long, so 7 inches. I also cut out some brackets to hide the join lines, and I glued them together with super glue and then wood glue. I cut some cross beams out that were about 45 millimeters long and glued the frames together, spacing the cross beams out about every 1.5 inches. I made 3 of these bridges in total, 2 of the long ones and 1 shorter one. Then I cut a bunch of stir sticks, roughly 50 millimeters in length. They don't need to be the exact same length unless that's the look you're going for. I wanted these bridges to feel a little bit rustic, so I opted for rough cuts on the planks. I applied wood glue on top of the frames and laid the planks out on top of that, leaving a few gaps randomly. It kind of helps to start at the center and then hold that first piece in place to keep the bridge from jostling around. Once that was done, I glued a few random planks on top of the bridges and some stir stick moldings around the sides. If you want a few broken boards, you can use the cross beams to help support them. Then I glued some rivets on the center brackets. These are called resin dots. I picked them up at a craft store.
No! God!
Next I gave the bridges a wash. Really it's more of a stain. This is the same mixture from the first project, just wood glue, paint, and water. And again, once that was dry, I dry brushed khaki brown on the bridges, applying it heavily down the center of the walkways and blending it out towards the edges. Then I dry brushed some black paint around the edges and the underside of the bridges. I used plate metal for the brackets and the edge moldings, along with some black paint to clean that up a bit. I kind of regret doing that. I kind of wish I would have just painted the rivets metal and left the wooden texture on the rest of the moldings and the bracket. After that, it was yet another dry brushing with the khaki paint, just trying to build up some contrast with the khaki and the black. I used the same 3 green dips to get some algae and mold effects: zombie, orc flesh, and acid green dip. The nice thing about these dips is they come in specific color sets. I believe the green set has all 3 of these in it, and I think this combination works pretty well for the intended effect. For these bridges, I wanted to try building up some mossy areas, so I applied some Mod Podge and fine flock around the edges in a few spots. Next, I mixed some matte Mod Podge and iron oxide pigment together and applied that to the metal brackets and moldings. Yeah, if I made this again, I probably wouldn't apply this so heavily, but otherwise I think they came out alright. And that's your basic trail bridge. For the last project, we're going to make some trail bridges with handrails. These bridges are supported by 2 main beams, which I made out of popsicle sticks and stir sticks once again. For the planks, I used these square mini sticks that are about the size of a matchstick, but they're a bit longer, and they don't have a match head on them, which is always nice. I glued down a full-length piece every 4 planks, and cut 3 shorter pieces to fill in between each of those full-length pieces. I broke the ends of the beams off with pliers to make them look a little bit more weathered. Like with the other projects, I wasn't being super careful with getting these spaced out perfectly. I was mostly just eyeballing everything. I wanted them to look a little bit more worn and weathered. And again, while the glue is still a little wet, I dipped them in sand. I cut some small 45-degree angle support brackets out. These are going to sit around the outer edges of the rails to add support. Then I cut a few mini sticks in half to create some posts. These are just rough cuts. I'm going to cut them to length once everything is glued together and dry. For the railing, I cut 2 stir sticks for each side of each bridge and laid them out on top of the bridge. Then I lined up the posts with the extended planks. I held down the post in the center to keep them from jostling around too much while I glued the posts on. Once all the other posts were glued on, I glued the center post on. I did that for all 4 sides of the 2 bridges I was making. Once those side railings were dry, I glued everything together. So this hobby miter box that I have is just wide enough to be used as a spacer for these handrails. It leaves just enough space to fit a 40mm model in between the rails. So I butted the rails up against the miter box on either side and glued everything together, gluing those 45-degree brackets on as well. Look at that. Later, when I was looking at the bottom beams, I felt like they just weren't thick enough, so I doubled up those popsicle sticks, and again broke the ends off with some pliers. I used wood glue to kind of hide the seams on those stacked beams and make them look like one piece. Like with the previous projects, I dipped these in a mixture of water, wood glue, and paint to give them a more weathered look. But with these bridges, I decided to actually paint them. The wood glue doesn't really take a stain very well, and that's pretty obvious when there's a lot of wood glue on the project. So I went over both bridges with a nutmeg brown. Another thing that really helps to hide mistakes is applying flock. For that, I used tacky glue, coarse flock, and later fine flock. And once again, I went in with my green dips to build up some areas of algae and mold growth. And I also added a little bit of this viney material. You can get this at pretty much any craft store. I went over the vines with a little bit of super glue to help strengthen them up and hold them in place, and that's pretty much it. I gave these bridges a day to dry and went over them with some Rust-Oleum matte clear, and that was mostly just to seal the flock a bit. I hope this gave you some good crafting ideas. Going forward, I'm planning on doing simple terrain projects like this on a more regular basis. Don't forget to like and subscribe, leave a comment down below. A big thanks to the Haunts Wargaming patrons. Your support helps keep this channel going. That's it for now. Hope you have a good day, and I will see you later.